So, against that conscious attempt to, and we used the term earlier, to delegitimize evidence-led discussions, conversations, comments, that means archaeology is automatically on the other side of this argument, because our currency is evidence-led discussion and conversation.
Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the week of the 11th of November 2024. I'm joined as ever by my co-host, Mr. Andy Brockman, and this week, of course, began with an act of remembrance, nationally and internationally. The 10th being the Sunday and more to the point, the 11th of November are days when we reflect upon the war dead, service and sacrifice, and the relationship between the civilian population and the military. And it's been an interesting time to do that. We've seen, for example, for the first time since Winston Churchill, a British Prime Minister over in Paris, for the French Remembrance Day. And I don't know, what does this make you think of at this time of year?
Well, obviously, like many families all over the world, particularly in the Anglosphere, but obviously, you've just mentioned France. Obviously, other countries have a huge investment in events that of the 20th century that lead to remembrance as well. But starting at a personal level, our family remembrance takes in World War I, World War II, and most recently Afghanistan. But I think moving on from that, you just mentioned the fact that Keir Starmer, British Prime Minister, was in Paris yesterday attending the French Armistice Day commemoration with President Macron. And it wasn't, yes, it's the first time since the first British Prime Minister to do that since Winston Churchill. In fact, Winston Churchill attended the French Armistice Day parade in 1944 while the war was still Second World War was still going on.
Right.
And nobody had done it since. And I think there was a very particular comment being made there, which was that Starmer was looking to Europe at a time when not only is there an aggressive war like World War II being fought on European soil with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but and the questions that arise over how that will be dealt with under the new Trump administration that was elected last week, but also again connected with that Trump administration, the idea that we remember people who were who fought against aggressive war, imperialism, against fascism, and the totalitarianism that fascism represented, particularly in terms of in terms of censorship, in terms of racism, in terms of the violent response to civil issues in society, such as the creation of the system of camps in Nazi Germany, which actually began well before the war as political camps, not as extermination camps that some were built as later. So there's a lot of resonances, I think, this remembrance season, as it were, which maybe haven't been quite as upfront before, although obviously with the Ukraine situation now almost 3 years old, and other situations, there's situations in the Middle East and so on, facing Sudan, South Sudan. We're living in a world where the understanding of war and the remembrance of what war and conflict, how they came about, and particularly how they're ended, have never been more important.
Obviously we've hinted there at the outcome of the general election or the presidential election in the US, and we'll be coming to that in a moment in terms of how it pertains to the culture surrounding public communications and the examination of evidence-based conversations about the world that we all share and how that relates to archaeology. in just a moment. But one thing that does occur to me is I also seem to remember, in the context of Remembrance, that Trump referred to dead soldiers as suckers.
He allegedly did, yes. And he couldn't understand what he also allegedly on the previous 10 years ago on a previous visit to Normandy as president, he allegedly declined to visit an American war cemetery because it was raining.
Because it was raining, and his hair might get wet.
Yep.
What a man, hey? What a man. So before we talk about talking about archaeology, what some people might call public archaeology, we should mention that University College London have announced that they are taking a step back from a focus on public archaeology in their postgraduate teaching offerings in their master's courses, and sort of folding it into site management, almost as with the public as being an aspect of managing an archaeological site, a sort of I wouldn't say inconvenient, but certainly an afterthought or an aspect of a site, as opposed to a focus of doing archaeology in, after all, what is other people's communities. What do we make of this? Because it sounds as though, on the one hand, it's not a great direction, but it may also tell us something about where archaeology is and where it's going here in the UK.
I think it does. And just reaching back to the discussion we've just had about Remembrance, as an archaeologist who specialised in the archaeology of modern conflict, public archaeology is very much a part of that, because those memories, many of those sites that we look at, whether they're civilian sites to do with the Blitz and bombing and sites where people were killed and injured, or buildings that people loved were destroyed and replaced and so on, that's very much, public archaeology is very much part and parcel of that. We're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing it, as you say, within communities, and within communities that have investment in those stories, in those narratives. So that becomes even more poignant, perhaps, if you work, for example, on the Western Front in Belgium and France, which again I've also done. And you stand in the Menin Gate at Ypres, and the last post ceremony happens every night, as it's done every night since the armistice in 1918.
Right.
And it's very much a public event, and some nights it's sparsely attended, other nights the arch is absolutely crammed with people, and people are spilling outside, because it's such a major focus of a very public remembrance on the part of actually the community that the war was done to, if you like. Ypres was effectively flattened. So this is a very important aspect of what we do as archaeologists and historians working in this sector. And so I think it might explain, at least partially, why there was quite a bit of disquiet on the initially on the Badger Facebook group, British Archaeological Jobs Resource, which for people who maybe aren't aware is one of the main conversation places, gathering places, public squares for certainly British archaeology, mostly professional archaeologists, many archaeologists who work in the developer funded sector, but also academic archaeologists too. And a couple of weeks ago, a rumour, as it then was, broke surface, because this wasn't announced officially. There was no press release. No. The University College London's Institute for Archaeology, which is probably, and I know your people who went to Durham like you might question this statement, but it's probably, having been founded by Sir Mortimer Wheeler and his wife Tessa in the 1930s, it's probably the leading. It's the flagship archaeology department in the UK. In terms of its influence and its worldwide influence.
It's one of them.
It's one of them. Okay. But and anybody involved in archaeology will have read papers by people who are either part of the institute or have been part of the institute, were trained at the institute, have done postgrad at the institute. It's a very, very influential organization, institution. But the rumor came out that the taught master's degree in public archaeology was to be cut. This year's intake was to be the last. It wasn't. It no longer appeared on the university website. You just got a page error if you tried to Google it on or go to it through the university portal. And it then transpired that yes, this appeared to be true, and a statement was appeared on Badger in the name of Professor Kevin MacDonald, who's the director of the Institute for Archaeology at the moment. Now, that was being quoted on Badger. It wasn't sourced. It certainly didn't come from a press release. So before we could talk about it, we had to verify it. And I contacted the UCL press office and quoted the statement that had appeared on Badger under Professor MacDonald's name and asked them if it was accurate. And they confirmed it was. So for what it's worth, this is what effectively it's the official position of the Institute for Archaeology. And I'm quoting here directly. We can confirm that the MA in Public Archaeology will no longer be offered by the UCL Institute of Archaeology. It was cancelled consensually due to very low recruitment. Elements of the public archaeology degree are being incorporated into a renewed and retitled Managing Archaeological Sites degree, which we anticipate will be launched in 2026-27 academic year. And then Professor MacDonald added, I hope this will go some way towards assuaging the concerns dropped into my inbox. Restructuring, of course, may not entirely meet anyone's wishes, but it's a valid option in an educational system under economic stress. And I think there's some very interesting nuancing there going on, which you might want to pick up, I think.
It's interesting. I mean, initially, the publication of the quote or quotes actually were, as you say, was a little bit ambiguous. It wasn't entirely clear if that second portion was Badger's addition to what he said or not. So it would have been better if this could have been a press release or a screen grabbed quote, maybe even on his social media or something. Who knows? But anyway, it was good. It was good to get some sort of clarity, because initially I actually messaged you. I said, "Have you heard about this?" And you're like, "Oh no," and various other people were similar. I messaged a few people who were caught out by it, but I can't help, because of the work that we've been doing over these many years now. I can't help but see an unfortunate boiling of the frog scenario going on here. We know that people who we can't name, but we have more or less sourced accurately, have said in the past that they're more or less happy to see university departments close, because that's just c'est la vie. It's just the state of the archaeological world that we're in, even though some of these people are ostensibly there to encourage public understanding of archaeology. I think I've been vague enough there, and we're fine. But and the only reason why I'm being vague, folks, just to be clear, is because of double and triple sourcing of quotes. So we're fairly sure someone said it, but we can't be absolutely certain. But nonetheless, this strong indication that we're aware of is one that runs quite well in parallel with other movements and attitudes within certainly the commercial sector of archaeology, whereby there are senior folks who believe that we don't really need higher education and postgraduate education in all archaeology, and actually it could be fine to have some archaeologists who are educated to that status, that level, and simply bring in people at an undergraduate level before they even go off to uni, maybe even not going to uni at all, as trainee diggers on site. So essentially, I'm concerned that it's another step towards, and just a sort of tacit acceptance of the idea that higher education for archaeologists is for some, but actually it's not necessary for archaeology. And to a certain extent, that is absolutely true. It is absolutely true, but it's interesting how little pushback it's being given, and the wording, that this is a valid option in an educational system under economic stress, is one where it leaves little space for the idea that anyone has pushed back against this. This isn't like Sheffield, where we saw people coming out and saying, we don't want this to happen, we really value this course, so on and so forth. But then again, if they say that they've been struggling to recruit people for the course, whether, on the one hand, we could argue that this is indicative of a culture that's developing within archaeology. Another way of saying that is simply to say this is now a direction that archaeology is going in. This is archaeology in the 21st century, perhaps.
That, I think, is a very interesting and a very valid point to make. And perhaps just as we need to wrap up this segment, I just to put the whole thing in context, which the Badger discussion didn't do, at least not directly. I asked some supplementary questions of the UCL press office. After they confirmed that Professor MacDonald's statement was accurate, I also said, and again, what I'll do, I'll just quote the questions and UCL's answers, and I think our viewer can draw their own conclusions in the light of what they say and in the light of what you've just said and the questions that you've posed. Firstly, I said, given the importance of employment opportunities for graduates and the strategic importance of a pipeline of properly qualified people entering the archaeological profession, were any outside bodies with an interest in public-facing archaeology, such as the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, Historic England, English Heritage, the Council for British Archaeology, or others, consulted about the implications of cutting the course before the decision was made to end the MA in Public Archaeology? The response from UCL: this is one of more than 10 master's degrees offered by the Institute of Archaeology and was recruiting fewer than 5 students a year at its closure. I then said, will the cancellation of the MA in Public Archaeology and the suggestion that any replacement of course elements will not be in place for at least a year result in any full or part-time posts being put at risk? And if so, how many? They said, no jobs are at risk because of the cancellation. I also asked, can you confirm that no other courses offered by the Institute of Archaeology are at risk of cancellation? And they said, no other degrees at the Institute of Archaeology are at risk of cancellation. And then going back to the chunky question about the place of public-facing archaeology, I said, how does UCL respond to the criticism that with public-facing archaeology a key component of the archaeology and heritage sector, which the Historic England Heritage Count survey states accounted for a contribution of 44.9 billion in gross value added to the UK economy in 2022 and employs over 500,000 people? Does cancelling the MA in Public Archaeology represent a failure of UCL to properly support and market the course and a retreat from one of the key areas of potential growth in archaeology and archaeological practice? They responded, the key aspects of the degree will continue to be taught at master's level at the Institute of Archaeology.
Right.
Like I said, people will draw their own conclusions.
Yeah. No, interesting. Well, yeah, we'll keep on monitoring this sort of thing, and also as well, if you guys have any insight into this or other situations unfolding in other departments, do let us know. You can get in touch with the email below, and also on the Pipeline news article, news website, where Andy has the means of accepting anonymous and protected tips. So please do let us know.
And I would just add, just to add to what Mark's just said there. Last time we looked at this subject in detail, the closure of courses, there was a sort of mini wave of course closures. Now, we're not seeing that at the moment, and this may be a one-off, but please, if you do know anything about other courses that might be in danger, please let us know so that we can address it in a public forum, because I think strategically the archaeological sector needs to know about this stuff and not be presented with fait accomplis all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not just be told this has happened, guys. Oh well. Yeah. Speaking of things that have happened, we now move on to the presidential election in the US. And the reason why, folks at home, the reason why we're talking about this is because I think there's an eerie correlation with something that I was talking about not that long ago, actually, but less than a couple of weeks ago. Whereby I was asking a very simple question, and that was, what is wrong with people being wrong about pseudo-archaeology, and examining in detail the notion that most people don't know about archaeology. Most people don't have to be aware of the ins and outs of the Pleistocene, Holocene transition, or, even what comes first, Romans or Vikings. Most people don't need that knowledge in their day-to-day lives. And this was echoed on the morning following the US election, when I was watching a live stream by the Rest is Politics YouTube and podcast outlet, where Dominic Sandbrook, the historian, was saying that most people, unless they're political nerds, do not know much about politics. They don't have to know much about politics. Most people vote based on how they feel in the moment. They don't keep a mental record, or at this point I'm sort of paraphrasing and expanding a little bit on what he said, a mental record and a list of everything that candidates have said and done in the past 4 years, or even throughout their whole political lifetimes, in order to inform their vote. Most people vote on simple issues, and this is where we come back to exactly what he said, and that was that it's the economy. People who were reporting on why they voted the way they did in this election talked about their own pockets, their own bank accounts, and also as well migration, with other aspects coming into it as well. There's been a sort of a Gen Z, slightly misogynistic jump, it seems, towards, as they say, the manosphere online. But it really underscored for me another parallel. So we have obviously the parallel where I was talking about whether or not people need to know about archaeology, the parallel, or the thing that it's parallel to, and that is Sandbrook's analysis. But also as well the fact that all of this is pertinent in the context of a broader conversation that we've been having in archaeology for the past year, perhaps, certainly the past month in earnest, and that is with regards to pseudo-archaeology, figures like Graham Hancock and Ancient Apocalypse, specifically on Netflix, the TV series. Because what we've seen since that second season came out has been another appearance by Hancock on Joe Rogan's podcast, where Hancock was given free rein to amend the record as he saw fit. The balance was gone. And again, most people don't feel the need to be exposed to any more Flint Dibble in that sense, or certainly not Joe. The Joe Rogan show didn't feel obliged to invite him on to say his piece, and so it just throws up in the air this big question mark, and that is, how do we talk to most people? How do we actually get most people to even want to listen, never mind actually being convinced of conversations that we're having about real archaeology, real history, and yes, dare I say it, not the value of not electing someone whose members of the former members of their cabinet has described as having fascist tendencies. I think all of this is somewhat connected, and it's connected, I think, in a way that has to begin with us accepting that people with niche interests, whether it's archaeology or politics, and people who think about more than perhaps their immediate family and their immediate lifestyle and their immediate concerns, unfortunately are in the minority. And that's by definition. Most people aren't archaeologists, for example, but also, as we've seen in this presidential election, most people, the popular vote went in the direction of Trump, someone who I don't mind saying horrifies me as a human being. So where do you think what does this make you think of? And I know I've touched on an awful lot there, Andy, but in terms of public discourse, and even actually the use of words like discourse, as opposed to, talking with with normal words, conversation. Yeah. What does this all make you think of?
Well, I'll go back to, at the risk of being really boring and repetitive, something I've always talked about as long as I've been involved in communicating archaeology, and and that's archaeologists. That's archaeologists developing the ability to talk human.
Yeah.
But I think before we get there, I think we need to look, and we need to be aware of the media ecosystem that archaeology now exists within. And I think one of the things that became very clear, and it was deliberate, it was absolutely deliberate, in the in the US presidential elections, and not forgetting also, it's slightly more complex than Trump was elected president by a few percentage points. The country is still pretty much divided more or less 50-50. Yes. It's not quite 42-48, but it's sort of the cursed ratio. But it's in terms of the electoral colleges, it was a landslide, but that was almost an artifact of the American system with an electoral college. In fact, Trump would still have won on the popular vote at the moment, although it's still counting, and he may end up either not winning by as much in the popular vote, or even losing the popular vote, which he did previously in 2016 and 2020. But it is very clear that primarily thanks to Elon Musk moving in with his America PAC, massive amounts of money, and converting Twitter into basically a propaganda tool for the Republican Trump campaign. The success of that was a success in othering critical voices, rigging an algorithm so that one voice was more prominent than those critical voices, repeating misinformation and outright lies, including from far-right actors. And a conscious attempt to delegitimize what is now being termed the legacy media, and that's being polite. Deep state media and some conspiracy theorists talk about. But what they mean by that are journalistic outlets that use traditional methods like shock horror, checking their sources and facts before they publish something. That is being seen as somehow anti-people, anti-news. Musk is going out of his way now. To promote X, as he calls it, Twitter, as the rest of us still insist on calling it to annoy him. Promoting Twitter as the source of news, and he quotes various stats that for various jurisdictions, Twitter's the leading source of news for people to get their news from, and things like that. Most of them actually are very partial, not verified, or just downright misused. But nonetheless, that's what's going on. So, and against that conscious attempt to, and we used the term earlier, to delegitimize evidence-led discussions, conversations, comments, that means archaeology is automatically on the other side of this argument, because our currency is evidence-led discussion and conversation.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately why we're so uncomfortable with it. In that sense, obviously I'm not an American citizen, and so while of course the UK will feel effects, the world will feel effects of whatever happened in US presidential elections. What matters to me more is the quality of information and the relationship that has with actual reality, compared to for example, there's no evidence that teachers are randomly performing sex change operations in schools. Yet Trump repeated that allegation over and over again. And this idea that what you say, or what certain people say, should be taken as truth, or should be taken as, in the most mealy-mouthed way of putting this, just asking questions. Just asking questions. Yeah. Well, actually, it's not. It's just asking questions, is it? It's actually scraping at a shared framework in which we might be able to have a conversation about the real world. And the reason why I've made that connection with archaeology is, as you say, is that archaeology, by definition, is trying its best to examine what we find, figure out what we find tells us about how people might have lived in the past, and then within that framework, within that shared standard of evidence, have some creativity in, broadly speaking, storytelling, and trying to express truth or truths about ourselves in the past using evidence. Once you start throwing it out the window, it becomes very messy. Anyone can say anything. Anything is true. But the thing is, and the reason why I'm interested in this, and hopefully other archaeologists will start thinking about this, more openly, is we opened in many respects the intellectual gateway to this in the 80s, 90s, early noughties, didn't we? With sort of a postmodern, post-processual notion of the idea that there is no...
There are no truths, there are only narratives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there isn't a single truth that you can find. And ironically enough, we haven't got an answer to that when people say, well, okay, fine, this is my truth, this is what I think, and therefore it's equally valid to what you say and what you think. I can't help but wonder whether what the strategy should be moving into the next 4 years, and as we think about also archaeological public discourse, because on the one hand, as I pointed out previously, what is wrong with people being wrong about archaeology? And perhaps one of the answers is the fact that if people are strenuously, stubbornly wrong, despite evidence, despite ongoing, recovered, emergent evidence, then actually they're not just wrong, they are actively creating an alternate reality around themselves. And just because a lot of people might share that, or a version of that alternative reality, doesn't make it real. I think that's ultimately why I'm uncomfortable.
I'd come at it from a more practical point of view, which is that it was I think it was Marina Hyde on the Rest is Politics US live stream of US election night, was talking about a friend of hers who is a scientist at NOAA, the American Environmental Agency that's funded by the government, that do research into, amongst other things, climate. And Marina Hyde was reporting that her friend was concerned that they were heading back to the situation they were in the first Trump administration, where, for example, scientists were not allowed to use the words climate change in published departmental reports and
Communications and
documents.
memos. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This basically, an attempt to create an alternate reality to suit a particular political position. So, and there will be colleagues of ours in American institutions like the National Park Service and so on who will be facing this if this is what happens. And archaeology is nothing if it's not international, in terms that we talk to each other all the time, we go to each other's conferences and so on, and we could conceivably be in a situation where we're dealing with our American colleagues in the way that we used to deal with colleagues from the Eastern Bloc before the fall of the wall in 1989, and that there are going to be samizdat papers coming out of America that say things that aren't allowed to be said publicly.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we could be looking at. Obviously, two other quick points I would make. One specifically about America, which is that according to statements that have been published in the last few days and haven't been contradicted, the Trump White House will carry out the stated aim of abolishing the Department for Education, American Department of Education. Now, that is an ambition on the political right, and it's an ambition that's set out, for example, it's been talked about a lot, but the Project 2025 manifesto, which is 900 pages of a wish list of the far-right religious nationalist element of the Republican Party, that has effectively co-opted much of the Republican Party. And the what that would have the effect of doing, if they can do it, and there are legislative obstacles to them doing it, but if they can do it, the idea would be that education will go back to states. States' rights, the idea of devolution from central government. Central government should be as small as possible. States should do as much as possible. And that was the intention of the founding fathers, etc., etc., etc. And that would have the effect of not only having a significant impact on federally funded programs, for example, programs for children and young people with special educational needs, but also things to do with curriculum. So, for example, if a state government, a state legislature, the governor and state senate wanted to introduce, for example, school prayer, and so that arguably could happen if it wanted to change the curriculum to remove books that quote Darwin from school libraries, and that intelligent design should be quoted as an equal theory to the theory of evolution. They can do that. And obviously that and if somebody wants to put Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse of the Americas on the school curriculum, they could do that.
Yeah. Or his book about faces on Mars,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that Elon's prepared when he finally gets there. It can't come soon enough, as far as I'm concerned. As soon as he's off this planet on another one, the better. No, I'm being facetious there. But actually, going back to Elon, I think there's another reason why UK archaeologists need to be absolutely on this, and that is that Elon Musk has already set his sights on the Starmer government. He was retweeting disinformation and lies during the summer riots following the Southport stabbings.
The so-called Farage riots, yes.
You might say that I couldn't possibly comment. Mr. Farage would be extremely annoyed to hear them called the Farage riots. Yes. He would deny any responsibility whatsoever. Yeah. But Nigel Farage moves in that Trumpian world. I think he likes to pretend he's closer to the orbit of the black hole at the center of it than, or perhaps the orange hole at the center of it, than he actually is. But he went on the record in an interview saying that the kind of destruction of government apparatus and the sacking of civil servants was what we needed to see in the UK. He and his Reform UK would be bringing a Trumpian program into British politics. But I think it's even worse than that. With his influence, and I think we have to see, Musk is running a partisan influence operation now. It's absolutely clear. It's nothing
Oh,
partisan influence operation.
oh, there we go. There we
And
go. It looks like the internet was cut out by Elon Musk there, just to quiet Andy. So yes, it's a partisan influence operation. Yeah.
it's clear that what Musk is running now, and has been for some time now, and it may even be why he bought Twitter in the first place. But he is running a partisan influence operation.
Yes.
As I said, he clearly has an animus against the Starmer government. Partly it's because he perceives it as, well, as he said, extreme left wing, which is laughable for anyone who knows anything about Labour Party politics. But the other thing about Elon's position is it is coloured, partly it is alleged, by the participation of people who are connected with the UK Labour Party, with organisations like the Centre for Countering Online Hate, which is a not-for-profit, which Elon Musk took to court and had his case unceremoniously thrown out by the judge, who said that he was bringing what's called a SLAP case, strategic litigation against public participation, that was purely because that particular organisation had published a critical report about hate speech on X, Twitter, and Musk took offence to that and wanted them shut down and to warn others.
Yeah, I mean, but it's obvious, why on earth would you want a campaign against online hate? I mean, obviously it's a bad thing. No, it's yeah, this is the ecosystem that we are operating in. We, as people who are recording things for you to watch on the internet, but also people's lives are unfolding in the context of it's not just a digital space anymore. It absolutely now is going to be stalking the corridors of power in Washington. So, and in that sense, I make no apologies for connecting the two, the presidential election and conversations about pseudo-archaeology, because I think, as I say, the common thread here is the clawing at shared objective evidence-based conversations. What some people used to call facts, but ultimately facts are debatable these days, and it leads you to wonder how we continue talking about, for example, new archaeological discoveries. If and we've sort of been seeing this anyway, as whenever something turns up that talks about, for example, people from Africa in the medieval world coming into Northern Europe, folks freak out online. So a certain group of people freak out online and start deploying their own versions of facts and evidence and so on and so forth. And I can't help but think that this is an important series of questions that obviously we can't answer in today's episode, but that I think we're going to have to collectively try and get a handle on. And I think part of it has to be the ability to talk in a way which ultimately isn't seen as being patronizing or isn't it isn't actually condescending, because I do think that some of the stuff that surrounded for example, the Joe Rogan Flint Dibble conversation and its fallout did fall into a characterization of an audience, or an identification of a demographic that was outlandish in its sort of cartoon-like characteristics. It was people holding their noses and pointing at the others, and that's on both sides of that particular conversation. So I don't know. I suppose one final thing I would say is that yes, I do feel strongly for my colleagues in the US, and also people who I know from the US in general, both living here and living in the US. It's been a difficult week. We've been dealing with, for example, here we've been dealing with friends and family who frankly have gone through stages of grief and denial, and even considered doing very drastic things in their lives because of this result. And I think it's again because it has the potential to change the standards of objective reality that we all share. That's why this election is different. This isn't just electing George W. Bush. He wasn't. I remember on his election day there was a story doing the rounds that W's had been pulled off keyboards. People were protesting George W. Bush becoming the president by vandalizing computer keyboards. Do you remember that story?
I do. The version I heard. The version I heard was that it was allegedly a practical joke done by the Clinton staffers as they were moving out of the West Wing.
Right.
So that when W's people moved in, they found that none of their computer keyboards had a W on.
Yeah. W for W for win as well. Yeah. And of course, we've seen similar things happening in the UK. 2010, there was the joke that used to be left for incoming chancellors that there's no money left, being taken extremely seriously. And actually, to this day, some people think that was that basically no government since has left that note because it was deployed as an effective political tool. And so some of this stuff is normal. Some of this sort of post-election rumbling, grumbling, getting used to the idea that the other side, whoever the other side is, have won, is normal, and that those people are going to set up an administration. But in this instance, based on what we've seen in the past week with friends and colleagues, it is different. When the incoming president's former cabinet, 40 members out of 44, saying that he's unfit to be president, then something serious is happening, and it has to be acknowledged, I think.
And a former CIA director saying that he is potentially a Russian asset.
Absolutely, that he's potentially a Russian asset. I believe that there have been high-level meetings in the Pentagon actually already examining the implications of an incoming Trump presidency and administration. Do you have any final thoughts on this? I
think all of that is very, very serious, but it's to some extent it's also political soap opera. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on, from both sides, to be frank, because as we said earlier, America is almost equally divided in terms of the vote. But on the other hand, President-elect Trump undoubtedly has a mandate which he's entitled to carry forward. At the same time, people are entitled to oppose it. Just because you lose an election doesn't mean you stop arguing for the things that you believe in. In her concession speech, Kamala Harris said exactly that. So and certainly the American political cycle will move on now to the confirmations or not in the run up to January 20th, when at midday, when Trump becomes president. He's appointed some cabinet members who are currently serving congressmen, I think it is, which means that there'll be what in the UK we call by-elections. And the midterm elections, they'll probably start campaigning for the midterm elections in about 6 months' time, given the American political cycle. So there's a lot still to play for people who are concerned, particularly about civil rights, women's rights, trans rights, all those progressive causes that people feel are now, and I think understandably feel now, could be in real danger. But there's one other thing, and I it's because of what I am and what I do and what we do. But I'd like to come back to that communications thing again. And I talked about the Elon Musk's position now as effectively, I mean, people have jokingly been calling him the president or the co-president, and not forgetting that his frenemy Peter Thiel is a leading sponsor of Vice President JD Vance.
Mm-hmm.
The hard right Silicon Valley tech bros are inside the White House. And I mentioned them earlier. I think I got the name slightly wrong. In fact, it's the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. And we'll post the link because their work is really well worth following. But they've been publishing a number of reports on Musk and the influence of Musk on American politics, which is because some of the people connected with it were also connected at one stage with the UK Labour Party, explains why British archaeologists, the British, have skin in this game, because we could be next on the hit list. But on the day before the election, November the 4th, they published a report which, to put things in, I think puts things in perspective when we think about Joe Rogan, the reach of Joe Rogan as well, and so on. But basically they said, and I'm quoting, Elon Musk's political posts had amassed 17.1 billion views since he endorsed Donald Trump in July 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And that is twice as many views as all the other US political campaigning ads that Twitter recorded in its political ads disclosure data set during the same period. And the Centre for Countering Digital Hate studied Musk's posts and estimated it will cost a political campaign $24 million to run ads reaching as many views as Musk's post did. And I think this is the one that's really scary. And it shows us what we're up against as archaeologists and anybody, members of communities, who believe in that evidence-led discussion and decision-making by ourselves and by the people that govern us. What they said is at least 87 of Musk's posts this year, 2024, have promoted claims about the US elections that fact checkers have rated as false or misleading, but they amassed 2 billion views. And none of those posts featured a community note, which is what X has replaced its own staff fact checkers with. 2 billion views of 87 false or misleading claims with no comeback, with no moderation. That's what we're up against.
Yeah. Well, on that cheery note, this supposed half-hour episode will come to an end, and we shall see you next week with hopefully something else. Until next time, though, do take care, do look after yourselves, and do let us know if anything that we've talked about today, you think that there's another angle in terms of university departmental internal happenings, or for example in terms of shared reality and conversations about the past. You guys take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.